This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwallpod podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 454 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund's fortunate 1-0 win against 1. FC Köln in their Bundesliga opener, Saturday's derby away to VfL Bochum, and, if we have time, a small non-transfer update. For that and more joins me Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I'm fine, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. So yeah, let's talk right away about the first game of the season. Wasn't quite the barn burner now, was it? In the end, Daniel Malen, I think 85th or 88th minute, I forgot what minute it was, with a somewhat lucky goal, considering that he didn't really hit the ball correctly and considering that he was supposed to be subbed off at that moment. But I think for whatever reason, Riasson had to go off instead of him because of an injury. So, Lars, as I said, in my perspective, Dortmund were rather lucky to come away with all 3 points out of this game. How did you see the the opening form of the Black and Yellows?
I think there's very little doubt that this was a quite fortunate win. I think kind of the prime example of why you don't look at expected goals over just 90 minutes, because I think Dortmund actually beat Cologne on expected goals, but that certainly didn't pass the eye test, if that makes sense. I think Edin Terzic, after the game, basically singled out Gregor Kobel as the reason they didn't lose. So the game was sort of going to be a goalless draw, which would already have been quite disappointing. First match of the season, there's a lot of excitement and good vibes around Dortmund, I would say, over the summer, despite what happened at the end of last season and some of the transfer stuff that not a lot of people are happy with. And then they kind of laid a bit of an egg in terms of performance. I think they were laborious, lack of creativity. The tracking back defensively was shocking, in my opinion, from a lot of these players. If Cologne had a few more pacey attacking players, I think they would have punished Dortmund much more than they did in transition. And yeah, I mean, when Terzic singles out your goalkeeper, that's not necessarily a good sign in a home game. And I also don't agree with, the positive spin that these are the kinds of matches that you have to win to become champions, or whether obviously you have to win a lot of games to win the league. But if we look back at Dortmund's run, especially early on in 2023, there were a number of these games where they weren't necessarily the better side, but just had, the luck of the draw or whatever on their side and eked out wins when performances didn't necessarily merit it. So I would certainly like for them to be further along in their development. I guess, first game of the season, couple of personnel changes and not really being in the groove and all. So I'm sure you can find a number of explanations as to why this performance was so lackluster, but it's just, you won't convince me it wasn't disappointing anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the post-shot XG minus the goals against factor was plus 0.54 according to FBref, and basically that led the match day. So basically Kobel had the best performance, or I think in the definition says it either means your goalkeeping is really good or you're very lucky. One of those two. I mean, if we think about the save from, I think it was Adamian, in the 55th minute or so, or 78th minute, there are certainly a couple of saves that Kobe really spectacularly saved, and to that extent, I also think that Mats Hummels had some really vital interceptions and blocks, where otherwise Dortmund also would have been completely exposed at the back. So those two players really probably the best players of the day. What's also very funny to me is that Mats Hummels also really captured how bad Dortmund's attack was out of open play, because you said don't talk about XG. Well, I'm going to anyway. Dortmund's XG was 1.8 according to FBref, and 1.4 of those belong to Mats Hummels alone, because he was at the end of a lot of Julian Brandt set pieces. I think his expected assist was like 1.1, and obviously that's mostly due to his set piece deliveries. Same with Marco Reus' expected assists, also 0.7. And just attacking wise, not much going on. I mean, Alea's expected goals and expected assists both at 0.0. So that tells you a lot of things. And of course, the midfield was very stagnant. I think Edin Terzic at the news conference after the game criticized Emre Can for dropping in between Dortmund's backline when Dortmund were building up, and sort of bemoaning that spaces that were open weren't quite utilized. I mean, he had 2 progressive passes all game. I think even if he's the number 6, that's just not enough.
Jesus.
And I don't know what to tell you, Lars. I thought that the double pivot of Can and Sabitzer does not really inspire much joy out of me, if I'm brutally honest. I do already miss Jude Bellingham now. Obviously, we can talk about rust, lack of automatisms, and all that stuff on match day 1. Certainly, there's no overreaction coming out of me, because how many times have Dortmund had a furious start on the first game of the season and then sort of petered out on match day 3 or 4 or whatever, and looked lackluster then. So might as well get it out the way now, and hopefully they show a better reaction than so already resting on their laurels right away. But I also thought that Bensebaini, I saw a lot of praise heaped on him for his defensive efforts, but I actually thought that his attacking woes needlessly exposed Dortmund a couple of times, had a weird miscontrols, couple of silly giveaways. So I don't know, I'm not really impressed by this performance and game overall, and Dortmund are lucky that Marlon had this one moment of magic, even as intentional as it was. So yeah, I don't know if there are too many more things to be said about this game. It's not like the substitutes really made a bigger difference, to be honest, but if you have any more thoughts, be my guest.
I mean, one of the substitutes got the assist for the winning goal, so
that was Mecha, yes.
Yeah. Although I think after the game he admitted to not having hit the ball the way he wanted to either, so it was doubly fortunate for Dortmund. But I think if you are, scrapping for a positive, I think set piece delivery was very good. You mentioned Brandt's numbers there already, and Hummels got on a lot of those, although I don't think I would, from my, again, eye test, I wouldn't put his expected goals there at over 1, because, for example, the volley which he skied over the goal, that's a very difficult take, and I'm assuming just because of positioning that is relatively high XG score, and sometimes those are misleading. Again, you shouldn't really look at them in a 90-minute capacity. But yeah, set piece delivery was strong, and also they had a number of games they ran during set pieces. So, for example, the goal basically followed a formula that they used a couple of times in the game already, which is corner to the first post, flick on, somebody get on the end of it on the second post, and that's something that defenses struggle with quite a bit. I think overall in the Bundesliga, a lot of goals over the weekend from set pieces, which might be down to rust or just coaching staffs having a lot of time over the summer to prepare some routines and whatnot. But given that we think Dortmund might struggle at creating at times this season, because no more dynamism from Bellingham. Their wingers tend to be injured quite a bit, and rust and whatever. It would be quite nice if they went back to the good run of form they had on set pieces early in 2023, because that kind of petered out after the first few matches. When they came back from the winter break, I seem to recall that they scored quite a few goals from corners and free kicks and whatnot, and that petered out towards the end of the season. Obviously, it didn't really matter because they scored the most goals of all teams in Europe's top 5 leagues in 23. But still, it's never a bad idea to be good on set pieces, because if we think Dortmund are going to be involved in a lot of tight games this season, which might be the case because I think the level of the Bundesliga has become a bit tighter, then good set pieces can make the difference. And if we want to look at the positive, that's probably the biggest one to take away, outside of Kobe being his usual excellent serve.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, kudos to Cologne, I guess, for making it a very gritty game, very scrappy at times. Obviously, they lacked the quality, as you said, to really punish Dortmund, because the spaces were certainly afforded. But yeah, let's just move on to the next game. Saturday, 3:30 p.m. local time, the kickoff in Bochum. Of course, the only derby for Dortmund this season, considering Schalke have been relegated. Bochum did not quite start their season on the right foot, since they were eliminated in the DFB Pokal in the first round against Arminia Bielefeld, which obviously is a tough draw, but then got dropped 5-0 away to VfB Stuttgart, and hence, due to that goal difference, are now last place in the Bundesliga. But obviously, that probably won't mean much at the Ruhrparkstadion on Saturday.
Is that really how it's called these days?
I don't know what it's called.
I don't think it's ever been called Ruhrparkstadion.
What's it
it's
called?
Revierpower Arena?
Yeah. Something. Well, Revierpower. I don't fucking know. Anyhow. Yeah, Parkstadion, certainly the old Schalke Stadion. God, very embarrassing. It's not like I've spent half my youth in Bochum Stadium collecting these plastic cups and then sneaking into the VIP after the game, eating some currywurst. Those were the blessed days. Anyway, Lars, whatever the stadium is called, maybe we should firstly talk about a couple of transfers that Bochum have made. Since I just looked earlier and I saw that Moritz Bruni-Quateng is now a Bochum player, and since he joined from your new favorite team, FC Magdeburg, I thought maybe you know exactly who that guy is and whether he makes Bochum a better team or not.
I cannot tell you too much about him because despite my profession of love for FC Magdeburg and especially head coach Christian Titz, it's not like I spent every Sunday last season.
Man, he has an inflamed pubic bone, so he is actually unavailable.
Even better. The thing I was going to say is that a number of Bundesliga sides were after him. I think he was, for example, rumored at one point to perhaps be joining Borussia Mönchengladbach, so tells you a little bit about his quality, but glad we don't have to talk about him.
Well, against Stuttgart, one of the new signings that actually played is Felix Passlack, someone we all know very well since he spent about 11 years at Bochum, but yeah.
Dortmund.
At Dortmund, thank you. But I want to say probably most notable is their attacking threat with Antwi Ajay and Hofmann, considering Antwi Ajay has a lot of pace and Hofmann is a sort of hold-up striker, if you will. Difficult to defend on set pieces. I also quite like Takuma Asano. I think he's a fairly decent playmaker. And Lugia and Stöger are a very Bochum-esque double pivot, I want to say. I don't know how you feel about them, but Logia has low-key footballing skills, and Stöger, to me, is the classic Hau drauf. 6. So
That's completely wrong.
is it the other way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually surprised because Kevin Stöger is one of the best deep-lying playmakers in the Bundesliga. I mean, it's a kind of a position that's dying out in Germany a bit because not a lot of teams actually play with, defensive-minded and attacking-minded double pivot, but Stöger is quite a good footballer. And Lucia, he's ancient. I think he's like 38 at this point.
37.
Yeah, almost. Everyone who's older than us, Stefan, is ancient in Bundesliga terms.
That's correct.
Sadly enough. Ultimately, I think Edin Terzic said in the press conference today, we have to play our game or something to that effect and not play Bochum's game, which obviously at Bochum tends to be quite difficult for a lot of teams. Even though last season, I think Bayern beat Bochum in Bochum on matchday 3 by like 7 goals. So that kind of thing can always happen when you have a team or a clear quality disparity, if you like. But I think Bochum at home is one of these tough away games that you don't think are going to be too tough when you go there just because it's Bochum. But, there's the pitch and the crowd are so tight together and Bochum make things eklig, as we would perhaps say in German. So literally would be disgusting, but it's not meant to be, quite that negative. It's just uncomfortable perhaps. Yeah. And I think we should also point out that while Bochum lost by 5 goals to Stuttgart last week, or on matchday 1, Bochum actually had a massive chance after like 2 or 3 minutes. I think it was Hofmann who sliced it wide. And obviously, if that goes in, and I think that's something that Mats Hummels actually pointed out in a podcast appearance in Germany. If that goes in, the entire complexion of the game changes because obviously Bochum away from home with a lead, they're going to sit back and make Stuttgart work really hard to get any kind of chances. So it's not like Bochum were slaughtered away from home and completely useless and whatever. Sometimes game state just happens. I think there were quite a few individual mistakes. I only watched the simulcast or conference, which I guess is now also available in the US. So I didn't have an in-depth look, but I read up on, for example, Felix Passlack having a poor game apparently, and a couple of other guys making individual mistakes. I think there was a penalty for Stuttgart in there as well, so that can always happen against Dortmund as well, but I think Bochum at home versus Bochum away are quite different pairs of shoes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and especially I also don't think that Bochum approach the game a similar way against Dortmund than they would against Stuttgart, who are more of their equals. Yeah. I was thinking about whether I wanted to say it or not, because Stuttgart maybe are better than I think they are. I'm not too sure, but I think Bochum will definitely turn this into sort of a cup game and just try to defend as best as possible, and then hit Dortmund on the counter attack. And if you look at the blueprint that Cologne set at that precedent, I think they have a decent chance to get a point or 3 against Dortmund, who since Bochum have been promoted haven't won in Bochum. Obviously, it was a bit controversial last time around because Dortmund could have had a penalty, but as we all know, that doesn't mean they get converted either. So as Terzic said, there's something they want to make up for, and I'm sort of not looking forward to this game in the sense that I don't think it's going to be a beautiful game of football. But if you like a scrappy fight, I think this is the right one for you. At least last season when Dortmund beat Bochum in the DFB-Pokal at their stadium, it was a very scrappy game, and Dortmund got stuck in as well. So at least I hope that Dortmund can replicate this sort of fight if they don't have the footballing wherewithal to create a beautiful show and just drop them, which I at this point don't expect. However, I think there's some hope for Dortmund to become a little bit better because Adeyemi, I think, is going to be fit to play from the beginning. That probably means that Marco Reus will return to the bench, and the attacking prowess of Adeyemi, Malen, Brandt, and Aller up top, I think, gives Dortmund a completely different dynamic than when Marco Reus is playing there alongside with Julian Brandt, even though that in the past has worked out as well. So Lars Riasson, I think, is probably not going to play. I assume that Marius Wolf will slot in at right back. Do you expect any other changes for this game? I think a journalist asked whether it would make sense to play Sabitzer in the 6th position and maybe put Metscher on the number 8 position. Do you think this is something Terzic would do currently, or would it just be one like-for-like replacement on the wing and on right back position?
I mean, I sure hope Sabitzer isn't considered their starting defensive midfielder on match day 2 when they made the other DM their captain this season. So no, I mean, I already didn't understand why Sabitzer was put in that position against Cologne on the weekend. It doesn't really make sense to me because he's a bit light around the shoulders, if that makes sense, for a true defensive midfielder. And it wasn't like they were chasing a deficit. I mean, they were kind of defending a point at least. And I kind of feel like Sabitzer as the lone defensive midfielder, not only bit of muscle perhaps lacking, but also a bit of pace. And Can has more recovery pace than Sabitzer. So that does not strike me as the most brilliant idea. I think obviously Riasson unlikely to be deemed able to start, because why would you take any kind of risks, or why would you put in discomfort when you have Marius Wolf ready to play? And then I think it's not necessarily cut and dry that Adeyemi starts. I think it's kind of a duel between Adeyemi and Metscher, which obviously doesn't make sense from a positional standpoint, but I think Reus is out of the starting 11 either way, just because he was quite disappointing on the weekend, especially when considering that he and Mats Hummels are kind of the only established first-team players who have been there from day one in preseason until now. And when you compare the performance level of Reus with Hummels, I think there's a disparity that was quite apparent on Saturday. So I think the question is who replaces Reus. Is it Brandt with Adeyemi coming in, or is it Metscher with Brandt staying on the wing? And I think that's most likely to be decided by fitness levels, and quite possibly I would actually go with Metscher first, because bringing on Adeyemi from the bench, given his pace, might be a good idea. But then again, Adeyemi was quite poor against Cologne from off the bench. I think he had way too many losses of the ball, and was certainly also one of the culprits in the lack of defensive transitions, which I think Hummels was quite angry during the game and made a couple of gestures which basically were meant for Adeyemi personally, because he lost the ball and then didn't track back. So other than that, it should be the same. I don't see why you would bring in Schlotterbeck for Hummels or Süle. I mean, that would be kind of making a change for making a change's sake. I think there's going to be enough opportunities to rotate, and on match day 2 you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. If we put Metscher up front, or not quite up front, but more in the playmaker role, I wonder how many times Dortmund's fullbacks and center backs will just punt it upfield in the hope that he wins a header that he can flick on to other players around him, since with him and Aller there would certainly be a lot of prowess in the air, and obviously in terms of set piece conversion that also could be a positive. So yeah, interesting to see what Terzic comes up with. But yeah, maybe you should note that today apparently was the first day of Gio Reyna being back in partial team training. So I guess that is also good news. And I personally did not expect Jamie Bynoe-Gittens to be fit to play against Cologne, but he was almost coming on, was he not? I think he was also at the ready to be subbed on. Then Riasson had to come off. But I guess that is, at least for me personally, it was a positive surprise because I didn't expect that. So yeah, I'm curious to see how this Bochum match will put match day 1 into context, whether it's going to be more of the same or if we can just say it was a rust game and this looks much better already. Especially focus will also be on the pressing and counter pressing because it also looked terrible against Köln and can't be the standard over the course of the entire season. But we all know that the pressing hasn't been on point in, I don't know, most of last season, to be honest. So anyway, last I teased maybe a small non-transfer update. Do you think that anything will happen / are there any news listeners need to know about going into the final weeks of the transfer window from a Dortmund perspective?
I mean, I would be quite surprised if anyone's main source of transfer info was a podcast that comes out once a week. So most will have seen, for example, reports that Meunier is being considered at Sevilla, and quite possibly Dortmund are looking to terminate his contract just to save wages. Obviously, that wouldn't be similar to the case of Nico Schulz, who got a payout basically for some of the money he's foregoing by terminating his contract a year early. So I think in terms of Meunier, the problem really is that he's currently injured, and I don't know if he's deemed healthy enough to pass a medical, and if that's not the case, then obviously he's not going to move anywhere. I think they're quite happy to keep on Hazard, who's not on crazy wages in comparison with some of these other players, and at least useful in terms of his versatility. I mean, he came on for Riasson and played left back on the weekend. I also kind of think Hazard had a positive preseason from what I saw. Looked all right. He's not going to be moaning about his lack of minutes when he's buried on the depth chart, if you like. So you can kind of live with Hazard playing. Meunier leaving would be quite good. And I'll for once be optimistic and say, yeah, something is going to happen until Friday next week, when the German transfer window closes. Be that middling striker signing, or perhaps more likely something happening in defense, with obviously the rumor about Armel Bella-Kotschap still being floated around. There were news this week that Bayern were also looking at him, but I think that would basically be out of spite towards Benjamin Pavard, who is basically leaving Bayern because he's never allowed to play centre half, and then they sign a centre half. That doesn't make sense because they need a right back, and Bella-Kotschap is decidedly not a right back, so I don't really understand how those rumors work out. But probably good to know that if Bayern want him, there's no chance for Dortmund, because Southampton want to sell him rather than loaning him out, and Dortmund obviously can only loan him with perhaps an obligation to buy at the end of the season. So we have to wait and see, but I kind of have a feeling that something is going to happen in the last 7 days now of the transfer window.
All right. Yeah, can't wait. In the meantime, I looked up what the Ruhrstadion is called. And this
not Ruhrpark?
No, it's not Ruhrparkstadion. It's the Vonovia Ruhrstadion currently. But yeah, oftentimes also just called Stadion an der Kastropper Straße. So if anyone refers to it at Anne Kastropper, that's usually what's meant. It's the Ruhrstadion. So apologies, but I needed to clear this up. I couldn't, otherwise I wouldn't be able to fall asleep tonight. Anyway, Lars, thank you very much for this little mini update, and we shall be back next week with an episode post the Bochum game. Do you want to do a prediction? We haven't done so in a while, but
1-1 draw.
All right. I'm saying 2-1 win for Dortmund. All right. Thank you, as always, for coming on. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekend. Until next time, goodbye.